There was an Axios poll in 2018. I talked about it on the show. 61% of Democrats believe Republicans are, quote, racist/bigoted/sexist, end of quote. 61%. 31% of Republicans feel that way about Democrats. So Democrats have a far, far more dreary view of Republicans than the other way around. I've also told you about that interesting little study that was done at Dartmouth a couple of years ago. The 500 or so freshman kids were asked to self-identify liberal or conservative, and then the ones that self-identified as liberals were asked if you would be interested in having a conservative as a roommate. Would that be a problem? And the same question was asked about the conservatives, so they felt that way about liberals. By a 2-to-1 margin, the liberals did not want a conservative roommate compared to the way the conservatives felt about liberals. Now, you make out of that what you will. Now, this business about whether that I hate Republicans, hate Democrats, was said to me when I interviewed Chris Wallace. Remember the interview I played a couple times? He wrote a book about JFK, which I read. I disagreed with much of what he wrote. So we had a very spirited exchange, and he said, "See, this is the kind of hatred that's destroying the country." And I said, "Hate? We're having a disagreement, Chris. You perceive it as hatred. This is a disagreement. It's not hate." You remember what he said about the Republican Party? They don't care about sick people. They don't care about old people, gay people. Forget about them. That's his vision. Now, my mother was a Democrat. My brother Kirk, as you well know, was a Democrat. I don't have disdain for Democrats. I never understood quite why my mom and my brother continued voting Republican but wouldn't switch their party, but that's another thing. You know, if my friend Mark is still listening, Dean Baquet is the executive editor of the New York Times, happens to be black. And he hired as a columnist a never-Trumper named Bret Stephens. I went to a speech that Bret Stephens gave when Donald Trump was running. He just trashed him. That's why they hired him. His first column was a column skeptical about climate change. And Dean Baquet was hammered by people canceling their subscriptions, angry that he hired somebody who dared question climate change. And it wasn't even dismissing, it was just skeptical about the alarmism. And Dean Baquet said he realized something.
Because one of the arguments that people have is, look, there's plenty of places to get news from climate skeptics, if we want to call them that, and they can get it anywhere they want.
Yeah.
So if the New York Times is going to stand for something, well, they should stand for something and embrace the left side of the progressive.
Well, the editorial page.
Thingy, my Bobby. I just lost all my words. The editor of the New York Times. Embarrassing.
The editorial page does embrace the thingy-mabobby.
Thank you.
But I would argue that it is the job, and again, I'm not the opinion editor. It's like it's not part of my province. But the history of the New York Times, that whole section was not created just to have columnists and writers who agree with the New York Times. It was created after the fall of the Herald Tribune, and the publisher of the New York Times, the original publisher of the New York Times, wanted some of the conservative columnists who worked for the Herald Tribune. So it was created as a forum for different voices. I don't understand how one can actually have an intellectual discourse in this country if you cannot have the opportunity to read thoughtful people with whom you disagree. We're at a moment in the country right now which I think, the left should do some soul searching too, right? We don't want to hear anything that we've long said this about the right, but I think the left, I'm a journalist, but the left as a rule does not want to hear thoughtful disagreement.